Hey guys, welcome back. So this is part 2 of this week's videos. Um, as always, I just want to start with a massive thank you to everyone. If you can please like, share and subscribe. Block filming just while obviously I've got my gigs to go to tonight. Which is why obviously I'm still in the same makeup. This is a look that I'm going to be wearing tonight. So yeah, please like, share and subscribe. Your support really does mean the world to me. As I said in the previous video, I will never ask you guys for money, but a like, a share, a comment, it's always free. I do read every single comment, as you guys can see. I will always comment back. Really appreciate you guys taking your time to watch my videos, and I can't do this without you. The past 7-8 months have just been more than I ever thought this channel would be. So with tonight's case, the second part, I'm going to be talking about the murder of Heron. So with all that said and done, all the thank yous out of the way, let's get into the story. So Anne, she was born on the 24th of March 1946 as Mary Ann O'Neill, and she was born and raised in Glasgow in Scotland. And I couldn't really find a wonderful lot of information about Anne's childhood, what she was like as a kid growing up, how she describes her family background. What I do know is at some point in her adult life, it could have been late teens, she married a man called Ralph Cockburn. That marriage ended fairly quickly, and she then relocated to England in the 1980s, and she began a relationship with a man called Peter Heron. And at the time that Anne met Peter, he was actually already married, and he had 3 children from that marriage. But they quickly began an affair, and in 1986 he divorced his wife and fairly quickly actually married Anne later on in 1986. And the couple lived together, and they bought a house called Aeolian House. If anyone knows how to pronounce that, leave a comment down below. This house has actually become quite infamous. And this house was on the outskirts of Darlington in County Durham. And Peter worked as a company director of a haulage firm, which was only just down the road from the house and fairly local. And Anne had a part-time job helping out as a care assistant at her local care home. But Anne, she was really unhappy living in Darlington, which I can sympathise with that. So just on a little side note, I'm a person who has moved around fairly quite a lot in my life. I was born and raised for the first quite a few years of my life in Essex. We ended up moving around quite a lot. At one point we lived in New Zealand. It wasn't until 2008 when I was 16 that we moved back to Essex, and it just felt right. Do you know what I mean? So I completely understand how Anne must have been feeling. You know, you spend most of your life in a particular area, in her case Scotland, and to move out of that at your comfort zone, I completely understand what she must have been going through. She actually herself had children from her marriage with Ralph. Again, I couldn't find any information about her children, but what I do know is that the children actually stayed behind and remained in Scotland while Anne was in her marriage to Peter. So the freestanding house that the couple bought, it was described as really conspicuous. So I don't really know a lot about Darlington and County Durham. Um, what I believe from reading that description and obviously Googling what Heron house looks like, it's one of those houses where you sort of go down a country lane and it's just sort of the smack bang middle of nowhere, really out of the way, reclusive sort of property. And I can sort of attest, to that feeling of loneliness that she probably felt at that point in her life. And the house was said to have been quite visible from, so it's a really large property, said to be really visible from the busy main road that it was situated next to. And so this road was the A67, and it was located on the main route from Teesside Airport to Darlington. And so this was like really heavily used. And Anne was said to have felt like frightened of the isolation of the house, and said to have been really, really frightened and really wary of being alone in the property. I'm going to try and put up some pictures of Aeolian house. You can understand obviously with the size of the house, and it was just her and Peter living there at the point, I believe. So on the morning of the 3rd of August 1990, Anne went shopping in Darlington with a friend before returning home at lunchtime. But usually without fail, Peter would always come home for his lunch. And on this particular day, he did so. And Anne said that she was going to spend the afternoon sunbathing in her bikini in the garden. So this was, obviously this was before I was born, but the summer of 1990, it was particularly well known for a heat wave. And that particular day was actually classified as the hottest day of the year. And Anne just wanted to have some R&R, sit out in the garden, catch some rays, and Peter ended up leaving her to it and left home at 2 p.m. to go back to work. So at 2:30, a friend of Anne rang up and she spoke to Anne, and she said that Anne sounded really happy and cheerful. And an hour later, a friend on a passing bus, she said that she saw Anne sunbathing in a bikini at the front of the house. Now, she had been forced to move to the front of the house, so nearer the road, because of a tractor that was nearby, and the tractor was reportedly blowing grass. And this was actually the last known sighting of Anne when she was alive. So Peter arrives home at 6 o'clock. He walks in, finds Anne still has the radio on. He also finds her book and a box of cigarettes, and their dog was also outside, and the front door was just left wide open. So Peter's looking around. He understands that this is not the usual behaviour, so he enters the living room and he finds Anne laying face down with a pool of blood, and she had a sufficient deep stab wound in her neck. Her bikini bottoms had actually been pulled off, which this indicated a sexually motivated killing. And the weapon was said to have been something like a Stanley knife or even a razor blade. And this particular weapon, this was never found, never located, never fully identified. So the police first investigated the crime, and they noticed there was no signs of a struggle either inside or outside. So this indicated that she possibly may have known the person that murdered her. And this was supported by the fact that the family dog, which was found outside of the house when Peter arrived home, had not been heard to bark at anyone that particular day, be it intruder, stranger. We all know what dogs are like when someone just rings the doorbell. And a witness come forward to say that she saw a blue car, so this was possibly a Vauxhall Astra. This was parked outside the house around 4:45. Witnesses also reported seeing a blue Leyland Sherpa van parked towards the end of the driveway sometime after this. And the van was said to have had a Trident logo on the side of it. And there was 3 men that were sitting inside the van. Around 5:05 in the afternoon, in the evening, a taxi driver and 2 women in another car were passing the property, and they saw a blue car speeding down the driveway out of the house. And they travelled so fast that the taxi driver didn't know whether to stop and pull out in front of him. And the car just basically pulled out immediately behind him and said to have accelerated, overtook him before racing down the nearby roundabout and driving into Yarm Road into Darlington. And several other people, they also reported seeing the car parked at the house and speeding down the drive. And investigators believed that this was the same vehicle that was spotted earlier, so possibly the blue Vauxhall Astra. And several witnesses also gave similar descriptions of a male driver as being aged between 35 to 45 with a suntan complexion and short cropped dark hair. So, as the police always do, they look closer to home, they look at Peter, and it's believed at the time of Anne's murder, Peter was actually having an affair again, and he basically he made up an alibi, and police believed that the alibi was false, basically. Peter claims that he was actually at work at the time of the killing. However, the police felt that he couldn't be fully account for his movement between 4 and 5:50, and so this would have been around the time that Anne's murder had occurred. And he gave really conflicting accounts over the years of exact timings of his movements, and he said that he had been meeting at Cleveland Bridge at some point in the afternoon, but he previously claimed that this meeting started at 3:15, but his daughter, she spoke out on the Channel 5 documentary that aired in 2022, that she argued that the meeting began half an hour later at 3:45, and this only lasted about half an hour itself. So Peter had originally said it started at 3:15 after being told by the police that a former employer of his had reported seeing him driving erratically at high speed towards the murder house at 3:15. So he spoke out in 2016 about the meeting and said it only took place about 400 metres from the house, and it ended at approximately 4:30. But his daughter, in 2022 on the Channel 5 documentary, she said they ended around 4:20, so obviously a 10-minute time difference. And other sources, it says they ended around 4:00 p.m, so even earlier. And Peter had also been positively identified driving his white car around a roundabout about 2 miles from the house between 3:50 to 3:55 p.m. And he was supposedly in the meeting at this point. In total, 3 separate witnesses reported during this time seeing a car which they thought may have been Peter's travelling towards the house at excessively high speed, although each of them gave a really vague, different description of this particular car that they said they saw. And Peter said that after the meeting ended, he took a long route back to his office. So this was through the village of Croft and Middleton St George, meaning he wouldn't have driven past the house. So this was during the time period that Anne was murdered, so around the 2-hour time frame of 4 p.m. to 5:50 p.m. So when police asked him why he did this, he said that he'd gone to see a woman who, obviously, as I said, that he was actually having an affair with. So, as always with the cold cases, while the police are investigating initially, the case was mentioned on Crime Watch UK. Mentioned it quite a lot during these cold case reviews. Again, it's a program I'm not sure if it's still airing. I've got to find that out if I'm honest. Because like I said, I don't own TV anymore, so something I'm not au fait with, but obviously I've got to find that out. Unless one of you guys can just comment down below, just let me know if it is still airing. For those of you who are not aware, Crime Watch UK, which is a reconstruction program, so it would talk about unsolved cases or fresh cases just to jog someone's memory of that particular day, and it would have actors reconstructing the moments leading up towards the murder and the events after the murder. So, multiple sightings of a blue car were described as the most interesting of the sightings, but also said that the car, even though it was initially described as an Astra, it could have been a Mazda. It also could have been a Toyota or even a Vauxhall Cavalier. So police, they tracked down owners of 3,500 blue cars, but as with the weapon that was used on Anne, this car has never been fully identified. Despite several witnesses saying that they had seen a driver, a photo of it was never actually produced of a man, with Durham Constabulary saying that the descriptions of both the vehicle and the person driving the vehicle differ and lacks the detail required for a photo fit. Which you can kind of understand. Obviously, you're dealing with someone who has been horrifically attacked in their own home or any other case. They need as much detail as possible to put out the best photo fit in any sort of hope of trying to find who did this. But with the different accounts of a car, the different accounts of what this man looked like, what people saw, they couldn't put out 100% certifiable photo fit. So another witness said that they thought they saw Anne driving near her home with 2 other people in the car, and that was around 4:15. But they weren't 100% that it was Anne. However, it's likely that the witness was mistaken. So this was only because Anne was actually found dead in the same bikini she was seen wearing at 3:30. So this basically indicated that she was actually sunbathing the whole entire afternoon. So, just going to go back onto Peter. So it was found a week after the murder and during, obviously, his initial alibi, that it was discovered that Peter, who was actually 55 years old at the time, he was having an affair with a 32-year-old barmaid at his local spa club, and this led to some people suspecting that he had the motive to kill Anne. Obviously, as I've already discussed in previous videos, this is just basically because it's more likely for a victim to know their murderer. And if you look at it, the way the police are probably looking at it, they're probably thinking that Anne's possibly found out about this affair, and he's murdered her, or he's worried about being exposed and someone else is seeing him. He's worried that someone's going to tell Anne, and he's just killed her out of desperation. Obviously, he's claiming that he never done this, and he had a full fit alibi with this meeting, and that he was seeing his mistress, but we will never fully know on Peter's full account. So, 62% of those murdered in England and Wales in 1988 had been murdered by someone they knew, and the statistics show that 37% of women murdered in the UK were killed by their husband, their boyfriend, or their lover. So, obviously, you can understand why they're looking at Peter. And only 13% of women murdered in England and Wales in 1988 were murdered by strangers, with most women murdered at this time being killed in domestic violence situations. So as Anne's husband to Peter and the person who found her body, he matched the criteria for the police. So Peter had actually left a meeting at Cleveland Bridge at 4 p.m, and he said that he drove back to his office through the village that we mentioned earlier, to Croft and Middleton St George, and detectives questioned him on this route because going by Croft was not the most direct or logical route back from Cleveland, which was actually only 400 metres, as I said, from Iolan House. And police felt that Peter had a missing amount of time he couldn't account for between that 2-hour time period, so 4 till 5:50 p.m. So sadly, by 1991, the case had gone cold, despite Crime Watch UK reconstructions, by press conferences, people asking, obviously, any sort of information to come forward about that particular day, you know, with the very different accounts of what people saw. The case just didn't progress, sadly. And by December 1992, a woman then come forward, and she told police that a man had come to the car shop in Darlington where she worked and was actually boasting about killing Anne. In October 94, the police, Peter Heron, and a local newspaper received a series of letters from someone claiming to be the murderer of Anne. And the letter to the newspaper, so this newspaper was called the Northern Echo. It started with, "Hello editor, it's me, Anne Heron's killer." And this ended with, "Your readers will have plenty to talk about, signed, the killer." And forensic tests were obviously carried out on these letters. This was in an attempt to establish who the author was. Handwriting samples were taken, but again, sadly, these led nowhere. 2 years after the murder, in 1992, so Peter then remarries. I couldn't find any proof of who he actually married. I don't know if it was the woman that he was having an affair with, the barmaid, or if this was a different woman. He ended up getting a lot of flack for this. He got a lot of criticism, and he had to go out and publicly defend himself about this. So he was asked why he had remarried so quickly. He wasn't able to answer this, but really bizarrely, what I did find out was that 2 armed officers actually attended the wedding. So it got to the point that they were probably worried that for Peter's safety, or if Peter had annoyed someone, and they were going to come after the new wife. In April 1997, Durham police, they began looking into the case again, and they made a small but possible link to a man called Philip Hahn, who was 29 years old at the time. And Philip was actually in prison for rape, so he was a convicted rapist. He had been in prison since 1994, and he was actually taken from H&P Wakefield to Darlington to be spoken to about the killing. But with obviously that small amount of suspicion, they couldn't find enough evidence to actually fully charge Philip, so he was sent back to Wakefield. So, with the advances in technology surrounding DNA and everything, the police were really confident that they would be able to find someone. And in early 2005, Durham police brought in one of the country's foremost forensic scientists to do a series of laboratory tests. And blood traces and fingerprints found on some of the 1,500 items originally taken from the crime scene. These were re-examined, and this led to an arrest in November of that year of Anne's husband, Peter. And he, like I said, he had been remarried after the murder and relocated to a bungalow in Wishaw in Lancashire. And his DNA was found on the samples of his wife's body at the time of the murder. His semen was also found on samples taken from the back of Heron's throat, from Anne's throat. And the Crown Prosecution Service agreed to charge him after he was interviewed a number of times. However, sadly, the case was eventually dropped. And this is just basically after a lack of evidence again. And the decision was made after additional expert opinion was obtained on the scientific evidence presented, and this led to an eminent barrister advising the CPS that the case should basically be discontinued. The Durham police insisted that Peter's release would not prelude from us going back and interviewing him again. So investigators subsequently, they announced plans to re-examine key evidence, and in 2007 fresh forensic tests were conducted on what police described as crucial samples from the crime scene. Investigators stated that advances in technology would allow some samples to be taken from the scene to be re-examined for the first time using what they called power-sensitive technology. And after this, obviously the case went cold again for quite some time. They continued working sporadically throughout the years, and in 2020, so during obviously the pandemic year and whatnot, the police, particularly an investigator named Jen Jarvie, so she claimed that she had identified a man named Michael Benson as a viable suspect. Sadly, Michael had actually died in 2011. Of course, I couldn't find. But this basically just meant that it wouldn't lead to any sort of arrest or any sort of conviction if it was found that he was guilty. So, Jen had contacted the daughter of Peter over Facebook in 2016 and offered her some help with investigating the case. And she then rewatched the October 1990 edition of Crime Watch, which spoke about Anne's case. And she concluded that the killer must have been a prolific offender and a burglar. So she then watched the November 1990 Crime Watch UK, and she saw that Hampshire police were searching for a Leeds man called Michael Benson. And Michael had actually escaped from prison using his wife's blue Ford Orion. And she basically said that this fitted the profile of the man who murdered Anne. Obviously, the witnesses see a blue car, differing varying accounts of what car it was. But like I said, obviously, sadly, Michael had died in 2011. So, I'm just going to have a little look at Michael. So he was described as a real violent criminal with a strong criminal history of burglary, robbery and assault with a shotgun, another with a carving knife. However, Durham Constabulary investigated the alleged links to Michael, and this basically just led to nothing. It showed that Michael was not actually in the area at the particular time that we're talking about, so he wasn't in Darlington at the time. And it also revealed that they were all but certain that Michael was living abroad at the time of the attack. So detectives also took DNA samples from Michael's family members to compare it to the crime scene evidence. And in May 2022, the Durham Constabulary they ruled out any possible connection to Michael, stating that he is not and has never been a suspect. So the Durham Constabulary, they also voluntarily referred to itself to the Independent Office for Police Conduct in response to allegations against them. And in the 2022 documentary that I spoke about earlier, that Peter's daughter, she spoke out on, it was revealed after that by the constabulary that they were still really suspicious of Peter. But they also said that they had some other individuals that they were suspicious of, but they didn't name anyone else but Peter. And the murder site, Heron House, this was actually bought by another couple. So their names were Andy and Louise Bloomfield. So they purchased the house to turn it into a boarding kennel for dogs and cats. And to this day, I mean, when I googled Iolan House, still to this day they still own it and still run Iolan dog boarding. I couldn't find any up-to-date pictures of for it, but they do have a Facebook page. I'm not trying to obviously sully their name. They're probably aware of the history of the house, but just stating the cold hard facts. But so this was actually featured in a Channel 4 documentary in 2003 titled Blood Under the Carpet. So this show was made and created that focused on people who lived at infamous murder scenes, and it fully documented the lives of Andy and Louise. I did have a look. I wasn't able to find any episodes about this. There was a small part talking about the actual series, but I wasn't able to find any valuable links to any of the episodes, unfortunately. But that sort of ends, unfortunately, with the case of Anne Heron. So as of, again, I'm filming this in April 2024, so that means that the case is still cold. They've not, despite obviously the suspicion still being on Peter, there still isn't any evidence other than the samples that they took that links him or anyone else to the death of Anne. Hoping, again, with talking about it, getting it at the forefront, it might jog someone's memory. Again, I appreciate how long ago this case was, but there's always that small sliver of chance. So, with all that said and done, I just want to appreciate your time. Thank you guys so much for giving me your time. Please leave a comment, leave a like, please share this video, and if you haven't, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next week for another true crime story with Silhouette. Take care, guys, and I will see you soon.